So good evening, everybody. Welcome to the SEMC AAMG joint program called Building a Team Culture. My name is Zinnia Willits, and I'm the Executive Director of the Southeastern Museums Conference. A warm welcome to everyone joining us tonight. For those who may not be familiar with SEMC, we are a regional professional organization representing museums and museum staff in the 12 Southeastern states, as well as the U.S. Virgin Islands and Puerto Rico. We have a membership of almost 2,000 and continue to grow. SEMC is thrilled to be part of today's program and even more excited that it was developed in continued partnership with the Association of Academic Museums and Galleries. The SEMC AAMG collaboration on Launchpad programs is a tangible example of the power of partnerships, peer-to-peer connection, learning, and camaraderie. I'm so thankful to Alexandra Chamberlain, AAMG's virtual administrator, and Christina DeRocher, AAMG's president, for oversight and collaboration on tonight's program. I'd also like to quickly acknowledge and thank the Gaylord and Dorothy Donnelly Foundation for the significant support they have provided to SEMC to make these programs possible and allow us to keep them free for all to attend. Just a few housekeeping notes before I introduce tonight's panel. This session is being recorded and we'll share the video as soon as it's ready. Closed captioning is available for today's program. You can turn it on via the CC button at the bottom of your screen and make sure to enable the auto transcription feature. I'm certain there's going to be many questions for our moderator and speakers, and I encourage you to put them in the Q&A box so we can keep track and address them at points during the program. Finally, while this is a Zoom webinar and your cameras are off, I encourage you to speak freely and engage with your colleagues in the chat, which will not be captured in the recording. Now it's my pleasure to introduce our speakers. First, we have our program moderator, Christina DeRocher. Christina is the director and curator of the Museum of Art of the University of New Hampshire, as well as the current president of the Association of Academic Museums and Galleries. Next, I'm pleased to introduce our first panelist, Yumi Eford, curator of the Richardson Family Art Museum at Wofford College in Spartanburg, South Carolina. Please welcome our next panelist, Angie Albright, director of the Shiloh Museum of Ozark History in Springdale, Arkansas. And finally, it is my pleasure to introduce Andrea Miskowitz, the interim director at the Museum of History and Holocaust Education in Kennesaw, Georgia. A huge thank you to all of you for being with us today and sharing your experiences working within different types of organizational cultures and creating opportunities for your staff. Lots to dive into. So on behalf of the SEMC and AAMG, we are so appreciative of your willingness to speak on these topics, which are not always easy or comfortable, but provide essential shared connection points for all of us. Now I'm pleased to turn the floor over to Christina DeRocher and our panelists to begin the discussion.
Thanks so much, Zinnia, for organizing this talk, and to Heather for keeping all the details together. I think this is our fourth online collaboration between CMAC and AAMG covering career topics. I always find the discussion to be really instructive. I hope that students find it to be useful as well as emerging professionals. I'd like to thank our panelists, Yumi Eford, Angie Albright, and Andrea Miskowitz for sharing your insights and experience with our attendees. So thank you all so much for that. So we're going to jump right in and we're going to talk about museum culture. It's unique, it's specific to every institution. It's really shaped by leaders as well as the people that we work with. And I was wondering if we could just kind of go around and just sort of describe what the staff culture is like at your institution. And Yumi, why don't we start with you, and you can tell us a little bit about your program and how you shape culture at your institution.
Okay, so my museum, this is we started in 2017, very new, and started with only one-person department, in 2017, and right now it's 1.3. So we rely on, since it's the college university, college museum, we rely on students to a great deal. So I have over 10 students every semester, and then try to train them, and then get great help from them. But at the same time, for like an actual like an exhibition and preparation, other things, I work with the college staff, like the marketing department, physical plan, and business office, and things like that. So I basically know a lot of people on campus whenever I need to get help, and I try to work with them. So.
Okay. Let me just follow up with that. So you employ 10 students every semester?
Correct.
And what do you look for as this is a relatively new museum? What do you look for in the students that you're hiring so you can build a cohesive team?
So I like for like we do have like a museum, and we do have like a museum guard / attendant. So like maybe half of them work for the museum attendant, and about the rest of the half, like maybe 80% work for the education. So we do that very active community outreach, and then we are partnering with nonprofit organization, the Boys and Girls Club and other things, and we try to work with we've been working with them for about 6 years. And we do a lot of programming with them. So like my students are like basically planning and implementing programs, and then engaging with students, and then doing like a planning for the summer camp and things like that. And the one last help is the collections management, because like I need someone, I have to train some students to work with the collections in terms of cataloging newly acquired the collection materials, and then the other things like what I need to like keep up with. So.
Okay. So even though you're 1.3 people, you are still trying to fulfill all of the various job functions of a larger museum with student help. So a lot of training involved with that.
Yes.
Okay. So we'll dive back into that, because I'm curious to hear more about it. Andrew, why don't you talk about your institution and the culture that you have where you are?
Sure, no problem. Hi, everyone. It's good to be here with you all. I am at the Museum of History and Holocaust Education at Kennesaw State. And I think one of the things that really through this process and my time at the MHHE, which has been about 8 years, is that we obviously interpret and educate about a very, very, very heavy topic. And we have always taken the stance that we take what we do very seriously, but we don't take ourselves very seriously. And so, although we are at a Holocaust museum, we have a very social structure to our team culture. We work together very collaboratively. We have team planned social events to keep us and the content that we teach not at the forefront of our minds all the time. It's really, really hard to be completely focused on war and genocide. So we have a very strong team culture. I manage 9 people full time, and then we have several others on the team who support our museum through the Department of Museums, Archives, and Rare Books, such as our business and operations manager, our AVP, our exhibit specialist, our graphic designer. So we really just have a very collaborative and social environment to kind of keep things light.
Great. Thank you for that. I can imagine that's a difficult balance to maintain. And Angie, why don't you talk about your institution, which I think may be the largest, you may represent the largest institution here.
Yes, we are the Shiloh Museum of Ozark History. We are a mid-size regional history museum focused on one piece of the Arkansas Ozarks, and we're a staff of 15. We're a department of the city of Springdale. Even though we cover 6 counties, we're funded by 1 city. So we're a staff of 15, but we're also a part of a group of 600 or 700 people. So we do have like HR support and things like that in the finance office. That helps a lot. I started as director 2 years ago, and at an interesting time when there were 3 retirements and the pandemic was, things were kind of opening up again. And so then we had all these openings, and then we were able to also add a new position So when we were able to finally get every position filled was only just this past May, just a couple months ago. And so there's some growing pains. And after many years of being a very kind of modest place, a very DIY culture, very frugal, we're trying to move. It's also an opportunity, right? So there were some growing pains, but with the pandemic changed everything. So it means you also just get to kind of change the culture. And there's a new director, and people who'd been here a long time had left, but we also still had some people who'd been here a long time. And so I think the opportunity was, look, everything's new. Let's do some stuff some new ways. But at the same time, the challenge was how to grow out of the DIY culture and into something more polished. And everybody was used to being all hands on deck for kind of everything. But now we're too big for that. So you have to help people, like, yes, we're all here to work as a team. Like, we had an event on Saturday, and the cleanup we had 500 people on our grounds. It's an event that's been going on for 45 years. It's fantastic. And with all of us doing it, we're cleaned up in 30 minutes after the event. And that's the great part of our culture. But it also means sometimes you have people dipping into each other's lanes, and they were hired to be experts in their fields, and they feel kind of free to comment on and, quote, help their colleagues. And so there's been a little bit of tension now and then around that. So yeah, all hands is great. Everybody gets along, but there are lots of small things here and there that I feel like sometimes I'm mediating during this growth period.
Sure. Well, that's a lot to manage, particularly with the retirements and coming on as a new director. I was wondering maybe we could just talk a little bit more about that. Like, how did you start to fill those retirements, thinking about this change that you wanted to implement, knowing that there's a certain amount of institutional history? What were some of the things that you looked for when bringing people on?
I included staff. We did our hiring mostly in committees, unless there was something sensitive. Like we were able to add a position recently, the program manager, and we had an internal candidate as well. So I didn't think it was fair to the rest of the staff, to be put on the spot to have to deal with their colleagues and make those decisions. But otherwise, for example, we would decide as a committee the people who had the most at stake. What characteristics were we looking for? What are the credentials? And then we made a spreadsheet that we all shared and put our rankings in for interviews, and together we ranked candidates. So it meant our veterans had a say, but also some of our newer people could say, well, the new practice in the field is, or what if we tried that? And then by trying to bring some objectivity to it, we reduced conflict. But then we also made sure that, there's that candidate who always wows you in the interview, but actually might not be the right person for the job, doesn't have the right credentials. And so doing it by committee, trying to use a point system, we're able to make thoughtful decisions and have thoughtful discussions about it. And it's worked really well. But when you do have internal candidates, and maybe that internal candidate didn't get the job, as happened here, was a problem.
Yeah.
Or not a problem. I mean, it was just sensitive.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like the idea of having like a job rubric so everybody can contribute to it, but there's kind of a clear distinction between qualifications, what's weighted, it's very transparent, and people could see that. Andrea, why don't you talk a little bit about what you look for in candidates when you're hiring? Do you have a committee as well, or is it a single person's decision making the hiring? I'd love to know what you go through, given the sensitivity of the subject matter of your museum.
Yeah, that's a great question. We have a very collaborative hiring process. We have a preset hiring team, which depending on it depends on the position who's on that team. Certainly the person's manager, myself, our AVP. And then we like to invite other members of the staff as they're available to take part in the interview process. And before an interview takes place, we really do a call for questions. What would you like to know about candidates? They send that to the hiring manager. Sometimes that's me, sometimes it's one of my colleagues. And we go in it together. We don't want just the administrators in the interview process. We want the educators and the graphic designer and the exhibit specialist all to weigh in. And the great part about that, we have a very diverse team. We're usually in pretty strong agreement. And then we have a really non-conventional, ending to our interview process. We ask a lot of wacky questions just so we can get to know one another and we get to know the candidates.
I think you have to give us one of those wacky questions.
Yeah. So one of the questions would be, if you could hire 2 Disney characters to come work for you, which 2 would you choose? Or maybe we'll do, what is the movie that you love but everybody hates, or vice versa, that you hate that everybody loves? Just things like that. And the team answers too. And so we have one of our team members who kind of keep a running list of like questions, like what Olympic sport would you like to train for? Or, and so then not only do we get to know one another in the interview process, but we get to know our candidates. And we know that not everyone is an extrovert. But we do know that everyone has something to contribute. And so it's interesting to hear what different folks have to say. And we want people to be comfortable with us. And that's really the objective of that piece of the interview process. Of course, we have to ask the difficult questions about difficult history in the more traditional part of the interview. But we want people to know that we want to know them as people and not just employees. And it's just a fun way that we do that. So.
Yeah, and I think that the fact that you ask those questions as part of the interview process already is revealing to a candidate about the culture and what they might expect. Like that itself, like how do you take things away as a interviewee from understanding the culture of where you might work? So that brings me to my question for you, Yumi, is how are you preparing students? I'm sure faculty look to you as, students look to you as their supervisor, but also their professor. They're looking to land that first job. How do you prepare them? What do you remind them of when they're working for you, or what to consider when they apply an interview at another organization?
I think everybody, we cannot really have someone perfect from the very beginning. And then, it's like a human beings, like the nature that we all make mistakes. And then things just take a little time, and we all need to be a little patient. And then especially, the education department, educational intern, it's a lot of work. We all know it's a lot of work, and then it's a lot of preparation. And then sometimes when you do the actual implementation, it doesn't just go along the way you planned, because you have different group of children all the time. So we all have good days and bad days, but they are learning that so it's like a mutual learning. They teach keys, but they're learning from keys, and they get to know the community really well. Our college is really famous for a little bubble, because it's they used to be a legacy and used to be a fairly expensive a liberal arts college, and then we do have a very impoverished area near the college, and then there was a huge the college had a boundary or a territory of itself. But right now we try to reach out and then work with the community, and then I guess a lot of people have the stigma of that, we two are two different worlds and we don't belong with each other whatsoever. But it's a little different now. So students are learning they sort of look at the community and then how to work with community, and which is really great. And then once they start working, they sometimes they express that they don't like this sort of job, but but I recommend that maybe you should try out, and if you don't like it, you can do something else, and if you really like it, you can just continue doing it. So some of the students, and also like they may think that after they graduate, some students like go for the field, like the actual museum field, and other ones go for like different things, like again, a school teacher or completely something else. But I'm pretty sure that they sort of at one point it's gonna resonate in their own life that like what they have done, and then they sort of like it's a great opportunity for them to grow a little bit. That's what I believe. So it's not like that, like for this you can prepare for your like a job period of the museum, you can do this or do that or anything like that. I can write a good letter because they work very hard, but and give a little bit of tips, but I think like they can they learn from their own experiences, I would say.
Yeah. So being at an academic museum, you constantly are dealing with new students coming in, students graduating. There's a lot of turnover. So how do you build a culture for your students that kind of lasts the long term? How do you deal with, are the students involved in self-selecting or recommending other students to work with you? Tell me about sort of building that culture where they can learn from each other and propagate it forward.
So I think like I teach museum studies course every year, every fall, and then I use the course as some kind of recruiting tool. And then if I can find students from the course, that's wonderful. If not, I still can get something out of it because they have to do something really practical for the course, like for the course, like such as that they have to come up with like educational programming or something like that. So I always tell like students that I'm looking for someone who can teach and then work with like local kids and etc. And sometimes students bring their friends, and other times that like students like they are recommended by the faculty members, stuff like that. So I always have someone, and somehow miraculously I find them. And then if I'm lucky enough, they are like sort of like the freshman or like a second year age, or if it's not like a still they're very helpful and they're contributing to a great deal, I would say.
And it sounds like they're motivated. They're already interested. They've signed up for the class. So there's already some interest and an idea of what they might be getting into. So that's great. And that they refer one another is also really helpful. Andrea, I want to get to something that you had spoken about, was a little bit about resistance. So oftentimes when you come in and you're trying to institute a culture, or you're stepping into an existing culture, you may hit pockets of resistance. And maybe without going into too much detail, you can talk about how you've changed that, influenced that, and some of the obstacles you've encountered.
So I was a professor for 17 years, graduate student, and then a professor. And so I was an explainer. I taught English and World Lit and things like that. And a lot of those courses were required. So I learned from that. I just tell students, okay, you're required to take this class. You might not be super excited about it. And so I was just honest. I said, but here's what it can do for you. And so I just have carried that also into my management skills. And so if you are honest with people and just validate and acknowledge what they might be feeling resistant to, they'll often come around, and you explain why you're doing something. Now, that can be kind of exhausting sometimes. It takes a lot of energy to do that, but it usually works. But also, I learned a lesson in this job that two people who had been here a very long time, one of them almost 40 years, one 24 years, I expected the resistance from them, and I was wrong. They rode with me from day one, and I could call on them for their experience and also be able to say, can you help me move this along? And can you help me with this and that? The new folks who'd been here much less time, they were excited. Oh, good, we get new things, new thinking. It was the people who'd been here about 10 years or like 8, 9 years who had more resistance. And I think that was more about personality. But of course, it fluctuates who's resistant to what. But I have found if I say, this is why I'm doing it, this is what I think is going to be a benefit to you, and you explain how they win from it, you can often bring them around. And then if you can't, you have to kind of I call it flooding the zone. So like if 14 out of 15 of us are going down this road, well, that other person is either going to have to get on, or they're going to have to make some other kind of or they'll be grumpy and go along with it or whatever. But yeah, so the teacher in me, yeah, is what happens. Yeah.
Okay. And Andrea, you are shaking your head. You've had similar experience?
Well, I think that that's fairly common every now and again. One of the bigger places I've seen that, to be honest with you, and I've been very, very lucky with my team, but with our docents and changes that were happening with that team. You know, they're part of our team too. They are a very useful and vital part of our team. But, you know, COVID changed the game, and it changed how we had to educate and how we did tours. And also we teach about difficult history. And so the way we train people also has changed in this climate. And so I think getting docents on board was something that we collectively really had to think about and talk about, and share and be upfront and honest about what we were doing and where we were trying to go. Everyone had a seat at the table. Everyone had a say. I really like to invite folks to brainstorms. If I have an idea, bringing it to these different groups in our team, whether it's our advisory council or the staff or our docents, that really helps cut off some of the resistance at the pass, because people feel heard. Sometimes if people are in a culture where they haven't felt heard, it's harder to get them on board because they're distrusting. And so the biggest example I can think of was with our docent corps.
So
Okay.
Andrea, I would follow up with that, that getting the buy-in. So again, a classroom technique though, using structured feedback, because when you just open up the floor to any old thing, you know, you end up with going down rabbit holes and distractions. So I use structured feedback.
Absolutely.
And then, everybody's contributing, but also you're doing something productive.
Absolutely.
And it reduces conflict.
Yeah, we don't do a Parks and Rec like open mic,
Yes,
stand
right.
up and share your grievances. You're absolutely right. And having questions, or even we do a lot of Microsoft forms, like questions prepared. What went well this year? What didn't go well? What might you change if you could? You know, very
We do that too.
structured, depending. Yeah, I
Yep.
completely agree.
I'd like to come back to feedback and some specific ways that you utilize that with teams and with staff people. But we have a question from Charlotte, and the question is about like office layout and technology. And it also made me think too, Angie, of sort of like front of the house, back of the house, because you have a large staff that is involved in historic preservation and grounds. So I wonder, Andrea, maybe do you want to go first and talk about, like, the specific question was, how does your office layout or technology, maybe you have somebody working remotely, maybe you've got staff in 2 different locations, but could you sort of talk about how that affects you, how the layout, use of technology affects your team building?
That is, that's an amazing question, because that was a huge thing when I started. Our city systems, gosh, we appreciate those folks, but sometimes they're kind of primitive, and our Outlook, our emails through kind of a strange system. And so because we are spread out across 4 acres, I just invested, we spend money on Google Workspace. And so we use chat. We don't use email, the email part of it really, because it's FOIA, you know, and all those kinds of things. But our chat has been a game changer, and our shared calendars there. Google's calendars are just easier to work with. And so my calendar's completely open. I mean, to see, not my personal stuff, but because that way we can check in on each other. But like the person who runs the front desk and I are kind of far apart, and we're in the Google chat all day. Like, did you get this thing? Did you get that thing? Sometimes it's a joke, it's a comment, but it helps, because otherwise you might go a couple days without seeing one of your colleagues. So
Okay.
the technology has been super important. And that chat, so like in the full staff chat, hey, everybody, I brought snacks. They're in the kitchen today. I made a cake. I did, that kind of stuff, or jokes or whatever. And that's made a huge difference to us. That's a great question. But our layout is also, people can buddy up easily, right? You can have a click within the staff because of the way our officers are set up. And I think that's natural, but we have to work a little extra to overcome that.
Okay. And Andrea, what about you? Did you have anybody during the pandemic that went remotely and didn't come back? Do you have a remote staff person?
So actually, this is something that's come up with my team very recently. We just instituted some new staff guidelines for remote work. We all have offices, for the museum folks all have offices together on the same floor. So Charlotte, I'm sorry that y'all are physically divided, but the remote work, and the more remote work folks were doing, the bigger the divide in the team. And there's a couple of reasons for that. Angie was talking a little bit about kind of all hands on deck, or an all skate. And we work for a large university. There are times where KSU needs us to help plan a funeral. They need us to help with student orientation. We have all hands on deck. We are a team, and that happens no matter what. But the folks that were working remotely were never part of those KSU, the administration called, they need everyone on campus to go support, yada, yada. The remote folks weren't taking part in that. And so when folks were out of the office more than they were in the office, they weren't participating in some of the, not planned, but impromptu team building that occurs. And so we didn't take away remote work completely, but we set some standards that we'd like people in the office more than they're not. And this is something that as a leader, I adhere to myself. I would never ask anyone to do something that I myself was not willing to do. But just really reframing this conversation about working remotely, because it does have a feeling of being disconnected. And there's ways that folks can stay connected. I'm not saying that's true, but really with the all skates or the all hands on deck and folks weren't around, they were missing part of the culture. It doesn't happen all the time, but it was happening enough that we were like, come on, we want to be together.
Yeah. So there's some great questions coming through in the Q&A, so I'd like to get to them. And I'll start with you because you're dealing with students, and some of them this could be their first professional experience working for you. So the next question, and I'll get to all of you, is how do you run your staff meetings? How do you set an agenda? How do you make sure that everybody participates? So if you'd like to go first, I'd appreciate that.
Okay, so I cannot have everybody all together because everybody's doing is a little different. So what I usually do is I have a group of museum attendants, and I appoint one a senior as a leader. And then I communicate through her that they basically things to be addressed and issues and problems and finding substituteships and things like that. So she contacts me directly. So she has my contact. And education, we have 4 students. And then I know their schedule, they know my schedule, and then we try to do at the very beginning of the semester that that's what's going to be, and that's going to be your schedule, and you're going to be in charge of this and that. And then if you have an issue, you can just get back to me. So that's how I communicate with them. And then we do it we do the programming twice a week, every week, more or less. So basically I see them all the time. So if they have there are issues and problems, they can address to me directly. And in case of a collections manager, it's a little more intimate. So and I try to give a little more freedom to students, and then a little room for them to possibly make mistakes, and try to be a little more tolerant. Initially, it's I couldn't tolerate, but that's why I'm learning curve as well. That's what I realized, that things happen. You don't have to everybody cannot be perfect, and if mistake happens, and if it can be modified and rectified, that's totally fine. So I try to try to train my student the collections and management, and then if they have questions, they can email me because it's a more or less that a little more irregular the job. And that's not like every single week they have to do the same time or same the sort of job to be required to do. That's how to manage. Yes.
Is this team leader? Do they get extra credit? Are they paid? How do you recognize?
Extra pay.
Leadership?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, extra pay. So team leader get extra pay, and educational intern gets extra pay as well because it's a lot of work, and then it's basically you're dealing with about 25-30 kids all the time. That's
okay. All right. So at least that student gets some extra recognition and some pay for it. That's great. That's terrific. Angie, do you want to talk about how you structure your staff meetings and how maybe you teach people who work under you to structure productive staff meetings? And do your teams feel that they're valuable?
Well, you'd have to ask them if they think this. I meant to start with a disclaimer, by the way. These are all things I try to do, and it doesn't mean I hit the mark every time, by the way, right? Some of these things are aspirational. We were doing staff meetings once a week, and that just got to be too much for all of us. So we do it twice a month, and I think they're helpful, and they're usually just brief updates. And then one thing, we had our education department take us on a tour of their new updated, a school program tour. So we all did the tour like we were the kids. So we did that for one staff meeting. We had one staff person presented about a collection he's working on and something he's really passionate about. And so we try to do those things. I think they're productive, but mostly they help people know sort of what's on the front burner. And then that's the time when I usually talk about what I'm learning from the city. Like the new employee handbook is coming out, or this happened at city council last week, and things like that. Our program manager came to us with an idea. We're working on our Native American history knowledge, all of us as a staff. And so we're all going to read a book together. And I promise you, we're going to have, not everybody know, they don't know this yet, to be honest. You can all email my whole staff. Now there are a handful of us who know the books are sitting here. But we want to all be going in the same direction when we're thinking about Native American heritage and history and all those things. And some people are really going to dislike it, but they're going to know why we're doing it. I also started the whole birthday thing. We talked about this a few days ago. The birthday thing was kind of getting out of control, and it's just hard to schedule. And half our staff have birthdays in the same month this month. So that's weird. So instead, we went to a monthly, the first Wednesday of every month, we're doing what's called a timeout, and different people sign up to host different months. I started, and we've only done it twice, but it seems like it's working. And it's a late afternoon coffee break. Somebody brings a treat, and we do not talk about work things. We chat, we laugh, we joke. And the first two, I think it works. And last week, I thought, I don't have time for this. And I thought, well, nobody has time for this. And I was a little stressed, but that's exactly why you have to do it. And so once you've committed to it, it's on the calendar every month, then I don't have to try to figure out how to schedule all these things, and nobody else does either. Yeah.
And everybody can participate because people sign up.
Exactly.
That's great. Yeah. Quickly, somebody just asked, does the museum pay for the birthday treat outing?
No, we're not allowed to do that as a government entity, but everybody signs up, and a second person signs up to help host. So they've been told they can do it however they want to. They do not have to bring something, but they could ask somebody else to bring it if they want to, or we could just sit around and have coffee or tea or whatever in the afternoon. It can be absolutely what the host wants it to be.
Yeah.
I try not to do obligations because I don't feel because I know times in my past when I might have not been able to afford something. I would never want anyone to feel obligated to do something they couldn't afford.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. And this kind of leads into another question that was posed in the chat, because I like the shared book discussion, the timeout, which is an agreed upon time on the calendar to recognize people, but also not to have it be work related. Somebody asked, what recommendations do you have for museums that need to rebuild or establish a new team culture after a period of the staff not being involved or being offered an environment of collaboration? I think you just mentioned two really great ideas. Andrea, do you do anything, or do you have any recommendations that people could adopt that you use to sort of rebuild the team after a period of time?
Sure. So actually, we have two social chairs on our team, and they do two things. They do lunch and learns one Friday a month, and these are things that relate to our work, but it's really drawing upon the expertise of multiple different team members. So I have one team member who has quite a bit of expertise about World War I. And then so she did a presentation for her lunch and learn about spies in World War I. And we're, history nerds. So like, this is all right up our alley. So we have another person who is really kind of an expert on Southern history. And so her lunch and learn was an activity about Southern history. The educators, the curators, we're all doing this lunch and learn. And we sit and we bring our own lunch, and that person kind of gets to present on whatever they want. And it's always interesting. You always learn something new. And then we also have social events. We did a Super Bowl this year where everyone brought soup, and we had like 20 crock pots. There was probably an electrical hazard in the office, but we all had different soups and things like that. Just opportunities for us to try and intentionally take a pause, because we are going all the time. And if it is not blocked off in the calendar, there's a lot of us, there's 10 of us plus our support team. It's not happening if we're not intentional. So Super Bowl we did, the team is doing a fantasy football draft. I am not a fantasy football person, but I am auto drafting, and it may not be for everybody, but we try to offer different things. So the lunch and learns, and then, just, you don't have to spend money, or, don't have to do much, but those little things do make a difference.
And how do you make sure that it's evenly balanced between, particularly if you have docents or volunteers, or you're dealing with students, there's always these hierarchies, who's invited, who's included. How do you make sure that everyone knows that they're available and will, like everyone knows that they're invited and can participate? Anyone want to take a jump at that?
So for me, it's like I'm dealing with students, and then my point, like a point 3-step person, I do really care about, and also like school photographer, and then it's sort of people that I have to care more than the other departments. So try to try to have some kind of like a dinner once a semester and invite them out, like especially the students who are doing the education, because it's a lot of work. As try to use a lot of work, and then the photographer and the point 3-step person, and etc. And then the museum attendant, they like their job because they can get a lot of work done while they are sitting in the museum. Okay. So it's not like that they are required to of course they are required to they assist with the visitors, but it's not like that they are docents or anything like that. So I'm not really doing anything specific until they graduate. So if they serve for a long time, and then you try to do something at their a point of graduation, but the educational intern and then those people who work really close to me, that's what I try to do. And then once someone is invited, everybody's invited, so they know that. So that's my priority. It's it doesn't sound very fair, but it's totally up to the amount of work they are doing for the museum. So I think it's fair, but they may not agree with me. Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
Angie and Andrea, I have other questions for you in the chat. Yumi, I don't know if this necessarily applies to you, something that you'll probably be dealing with down the road, but Andrea and Angie, have you had to change or revise your personnel structure rewrite job titles, combine units, done any kind of restructuring? Maybe you could speak to that. Andrea, why don't we go with you first?
Sure. This is actually happening for us right now. So in
Great.
addition to changing our staff meetings, which we have now moved to biweekly, just like Angie, I am the interim executive director. And so I have now taken a role, and it's kind of my job in this transition. And there's a possibility that it becomes a permanent change. Really taking a look at structures that existed and changing them. I mentioned I manage 9 people. That's a lot. And one thing that I always do with every member of my team is I have a monthly one-on-one with every member of my team. And I can't do that anymore. Having 9 lunch one-on-ones or coffees in a month and trying to coordinate 2 people's schedules to do that. And as soon as I realized that that was something that I couldn't do anymore, I kind of realized we need to make some structural changes, because employees deserve to have their boss have FaceTime with them. And I usually do it at a coffee house or like a non-office setting, although I offer that as an option if folks don't want to go for coffee or anything like that. But it just gives you some of that one-on-one time. So what I have conceded is I am moving someone to the position of manager, which is a role I've formerly had. And she will manage the 5 full-time museum educators. We have 5 people who are completely just dedicated to museum education. And she is going to continue the one-on-ones with them. But they still wanted to get FaceTime with me. So I'll do something with everyone, the educators quarterly, because they're still important to me. But I just can't do it every month anymore. And like I said, I kind of had to make that call when I was like, you know what? I can't be the manager that I want to be with my increased responsibilities. We need to restructure. So when I started, we were a flat reporting structure. And now we have a couple of different levels, and management is one of them. And then curation positions. There's different pathways people can take. And when I started, there was none of that existed. People need pathways. Yeah.
Let me ask though, so now you have people who are accustomed to having one-on-one time with you, now having a manager. What's been the response to that change?
I think it was really a matter of being honest and saying, I care about you getting hurt, you being heard. I was very upfront and honest. Everyone seemed to be okay, but I think everyone was still glad that they were still going to get some FaceTime quarterly. But we were really just honest, and the team knows like how my responsibilities have shifted in this new role that I'm in. And I think we have such a great team and culture that folks know I really thought about it, and I talked about it, and we discussed it as a group and kind of came to that consensus. And it's been great. It really has, because everyone is being heard. And then it's Maddie, who is that person. She and I talk about, how are the educators doing? Like, what have you gathered? Is there anything I can support you on? But really creating different pathways as well for the team is something that in this role I have to very, very, very strategically think about, because if people don't feel like there's anywhere to go, they're not going to stay.
Okay. And Angie, what about you? You are kind of nestled within a municipality. How do you go about creating new job titles or shifting responsibilities? Because I would imagine that there's probably an employment structure that you have to follow in terms of steps, and maybe you could talk.
That is a great question. In some ways, honestly, we get kind of left. We're just trusted. We're not left like out in the, but we are trusted to do what we do. And so over the years, the museum has been able to kind of make up its own job titles, and with the understanding from the city that they might not know what those titles mean. I think some of them are a little awkward, and luckily we just have a great HR department. And so we have revamped quite a few, maybe close to half of our jobs. Really? And new job descriptions, working on titles. we had to do exactly what Andrea was talking about. We were doing so much education and programming with not enough people. So I was able to make a case for adding a staff person, the person we just recently hired. And she's just the right personality. So 2 people who were reporting to me now report to her. And she just manages it beautifully. But then I support her, and I can kind of tell her, like, talk about personalities or things we need to work on. And she seems to be really great at communicating that to them. And I have to say, I miss it a little bit. I miss knowing more details about our programming, but that's me having it. I just have to get over it. I just have to trust that they're doing a great job. And I have to back out a little bit to do some of the things I need to do. We have a major restructuring coming next year, with a major retirement. And that is going to be a little uncomfortable for some people, but it's really, really logical. Our current structure is partly based on personalities of former employees. And now we can move into something that makes sense in a museum. And I think over time, people will understand. I'm also lucky. We're in a city that is booming. Our economy in the region is booming. And so people are a lot more gracious. It's a lot easier to get on board with new ideas when everybody has plenty of money. Now, we're not going to get rich off our jobs or anything, but we also have a city government that's really supporting
That's great.
staff and trying to bring, like they say, we want to be the city to work for in our region. And they're working really hard at that. So in some ways, I don't even have to work as hard as I might have.
Okay. There's a question in the chat, and it talks about how do you address a new manager? You've just recently named new managers. How do you coach up that manager as the supervisor, but also as the person who's reporting to that person? So you're going to have, like, from the top down, but also from the bottom up. How do you smooth that communication pathway? So do you have general advice for helping build a positive team culture for the people who may now be reporting to somebody new? Yeah, go ahead.
Well, I will literally sometimes, depending on the personality, I will sometimes actually help them with language. I was an English professor, right? I like words. So sometimes I'll just help them with a script. Plus, I love advice columns. If you read advice columns, they're really great about that. But giving them words to use helps them. It gives them a little bit of confidence, right? But it also helps get a certain kind of point across. Like, if you approach it this way and this personality, you're more likely to get this kind of response. So I'll do really literal coaching. But I have to admit, I haven't had to do that so much with the people who have a new manager. I feel really lucky now that somebody just asked that question.
Yeah. And Andrea, what about you? You've just selected somebody to be a manager. Did you have to provide any coaching? Did you offer any strategies for them now that they have people reporting to them? And what advice did you give the people that formerly had one-on-one time with you?
And I think that's a great point. I'm still working with her. The objective for me is always to prepare the next person. But sometimes that happens more quickly than we'd like because just life and business happen. And so a big thing I ask my manager is when she comes to me, well, so-and-so asked me about so and such. Well, what do you think? And I let her talk through it. And if you had to make a decision right now, what would you say? And we really talk about it together. I said, no, it's a no judgment zone. We're working through this together. So she and I are very collaborative together. I trust her authority. I try not to undermine her with the team, but and I think it was a little bit of a shift because she went from a peer to a manager. And that happened with me. I went from a peer to a manager, and that can be a very difficult transition. But, having open conversations with the team, being firm in the decision. You know, I know this is the right call. You can always come to me if you have, you know, questions or concerns, and I'll listen to them. It doesn't mean I'm going to address every little thing, but it's a loaded question. But yes, we work together still very, very closely, because this is a period of transition. It's not just like the light switches and I'm gone. I would hope that didn't happen to somebody. It happens to people sometimes. It's like someone quits and someone's left to figure it out. But I don't want to put my team in that place.
Okay, I'm going to read the next question. I think it's a little bit off topic, but I think it's an important one. And there's such collective wisdom and knowledge on this call that I'll put it out for other people to respond to. So the question that came through in the chat is, at college and university museums, are there de-escalating techniques that you find useful, or are there resources for dealing with aggressive visitors? So again, this is a visitor service centered question. I'm not expecting you all to answer it, but if people in the chat on this call could respond in the chat for resources or ideas for dealing with aggressive visitors at colleges and university, please respond. Thank you so much for doing that. This is our last.
Christina, can I throw out one of those resources? I worked in social services for 3 years as part of my nonprofit career. And I did a course in mental health first aid. And if you can find something like that around you, it has benefited me in every role I've been in. And it doesn't have to be somebody having an acute mental health crisis, but they teach really great strategies for de-escalation, for body language, for whatever is happening. So if you can find a mental health first aid class, course, workshop, I think that would be hugely beneficial.
Great idea. And maybe some of our campus health services provide that. So thank you for responding. The last question is, we only have 2 minutes left. So with more democratized roles, especially curatorial, becoming equal with education, do you find that leveling or flattening affects your internal team culture? You're both smiling. Andrea, go ahead.
I think that we have a mission, and it's our job to achieve that mission. And I'm very lucky that I have a team who very deeply believes in our mission, and kind of setting the tone that no one's job is more important than another. We're all working to, and I believe that, like, at my core, that we couldn't do what we do without the educators, without the curators. We have to make it work together. I think kind of going in, it's different saying it and truly believing it, but going in and believing it and saying it has been helpful for our culture. We're all here to work together to achieve our mission. And it's a very important mission right now. We work with difficult history. We work with, you know, in situations that, you know, school districts are confused and concerned about what we educate on or what we exhibit. And so we're all on the same team.
Yeah, we've been very, I think, lucky in that sense over the years that everybody sort of understood that education and curatorial was important. And in some ways, it's the education that, I mean, both make the other possible, right? And so our curatorial and our collections team, you cannot escape the fact that there are thousands of kids and hundreds of adults over the year coming through our doors or attending our programs. And so I think they just sort of by osmosis pick up on the importance of that. And I can see how that would happen in lots of institutions and museums, that there would be that conflict. And I'm very lucky to have walked into a place where that's not the case.
Yeah. Yumi, I'm going to phrase the question a little bit differently for you, because you also now have sort of a practice side of your faculty role as well as research classroom. How are you finding your dual role? What's the reception amongst your colleagues? Do they respect the practical side as well as the research teaching side?
It's totally up to in what situation / context they had they have encountered the me. So I participated in student research, faculty student collaborative research, several different occasions. So they know that, and they know I'm teaching, but at the same time, some other faculty members are contacting me through the course, and then the exhibition related to their course, curricula or interdisciplinary curricula, an exhibit. So it's up to where they sort of found me, and then other people, they have no idea who I am. So we still have people that they have no idea, they have
No idea what you're doing.
we have a museum, and then there's a huge gap. I really want to cross, but we'll see. I think it's very time consuming.
Yeah.
So,
and it's a building opportunity to let more people know what you're doing. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Well, listen, we are at time. We're a little bit over. I am so grateful for your knowledge, for sharing your expertise and experience. I think Zinnia must